Now, in this week's Let's Talk Some Star Wars, we're going to take a look at the results of, and your comments from, the poll that asked the question, what's your stance on Mace Windu having survived? And to be clear, before getting into all this, there's been no talk from Disney or Lucasfilm about a possible return of the character, but Samuel L. Jackson has said many times before, and again said recently, that he thinks Windu survived and that he'd love to return to the role. And as we take a look at the results of the poll, we'll see that 42% of you thought it's not impossible that he lived, it's just highly unlikely. 23% then said he died in Revenge of the Sith, and that's that, which means roughly 2/3 of people are leaning more towards him not having made it. There was then 10% in the middle who either didn't have a strong opinion or thought it could go either way, and then on the other side of things there were 19% who think there's a pretty good chance he lived, and 6% who absolutely believe he lived. And wasting no time here, let's get right to your comments, where I'll delve a bit more into how I feel about this topic by responding to what some of you had to say. And as always here, thank you to everyone who did indeed leave a comment. Obviously, I can't get to them all in the video, but I do appreciate them all nonetheless. And as usual, we'll start with the top-rated comment that came to us from DRH888, who said, "Death means nothing if you keep on bringing characters back. Would be open to a history of or a standalone story before episode 3. And I do agree with you here. Dead needs to mean dead in Star Wars, or there's no drama or tension to any of it. It takes all the weight away from the story if you can never be sure if a villain is actually dead or not. And bringing back Maul was the best, worst decision George Lucas has ever made. Because, yeah, what they did with him in the Clone Wars and in Rebels was terrific. They turned a two-dimensional and double-bladed saber-wielding bad guy from the Phantom Menace into a fully fleshed out and amazing character. But in the process, they opened up the door for other characters to also come back." Alright, next comment up is this one from Colin Copland, who said, "In DC Comics, only Thomas and Martha Wayne stay dead. In Marvel Comics, only Spider-Man's Uncle Ben stays dead. And in Star Wars lore, it's beginning to look like only Luke Skywalker's Aunt Beru and Uncle Owen will stay dead." Sad but true, and it feels like there's two categories of dead in these franchises. Those who are absolutely 100% dead, and those who are just waiting to come back. Okay, let's now move on to this comment from the Lord of the Rings theorist, who said, "We have seen Mace jump 100 feet or more down at Geonosis without a scratch. While this fall was way bigger, I believe as skilled as Mace is, he would easily find a way to slow his fall down or get in one of the many small ships flying throughout Coruscant. Also, his injuries weren't fatal by any means. Luke was shocked by Palpatine way longer than Mace was. The only difference here is that Mace had his hand chopped off. So, while he would be in immense pain, Mace surely had the ability to survive his fall." Then there's this comment from Mr. Sobe00, who said, "I mean, we watched Anakin fall like 100 stories and land on a speeder at terminal velocity. At this point, he was still a Padawan. I don't think it's unreasonable that Master Windu could survive a fall from the Chancellor's office, even wounded. Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't the building a giant dome? It's not even a vertical drop all the way down." Well, first of all, here you are right, it is a dome, but Mace gets blown out that window pretty good, so I don't know if that's going to play a factor. And the thing about these last two comments, and many others like them that I, of course, won't have time to get to, is that within the context of Star Wars, it's hard to argue that he couldn't survive this. Assuming that after the lightning, Windu is conscious and has his wits about him, there's nothing to say he couldn't find a way to have survived by using the Force, by slowing his fall or finding something else to land on, or whatever else it might be. In fact, he would have done everything to save himself, again assuming he is conscious, and why wouldn't he be if Luke had experienced pretty much the same thing for longer, getting zapped by Palpatine, and he seemed pretty much fine after it. Okay, now we move on to this comment from Madbro Shio, who said, "Rule of cinema is if you don't see them die, they are absolutely still alive. Also, fall damage doesn't exist in Star Wars. Luke fell in Cloud City, and he was completely fine. Darth Maul fell after getting cut in half, and he was fine. And it looks like Darth Sidious is alive, and he also fell and exploded. I can't even remember a single time anyone died by falling in Star Wars." And you're pretty much touching on the biggest point of contention here, because technically, we don't see Mace Windu die. Is it heavily implied that he did? Well, yeah. Was it also heavily implied that Darth Maul died when he got cut in half and fell down a shaft? Yeah, but he came back. So, like one of the previous comments brought up, unless we actually see these characters charred down to the bone, like we did with Beru and Owen, there's nothing stopping them from coming back, it seems. Okay, now onto this comment from S1MN05, who said, "More Jedi that survived after Order 66 sort of cheapens the impact of how heavy the slaughter of the Jedi Order was, plus how significant it was that Obi-Wan survived and saved Luke." And I do mostly agree with this. Every time we hear about another Jedi that survived, it does lessen the impact of that moment in the movie, till we're left wondering if the only Jedi that actually were killed during Order 66 were the half dozen we actually see killed in the film. And going by the rule of cinema brought up in the last comment, where if you don't see them die on screen, they're not really dead, well, then there are a lot of Jedi left out there yet. But seriously here, I'm absolutely okay with some of them surviving. We have Obi-Wan's line to Luke about Vader hunting down and destroying the Jedi, so absolutely it makes sense that some of them did escape Order 66. Alright, moving on now to a comment from Bionic Backlash, who said, his death is symbolic of the failure of the Jedi, specifically of the prequel era, not of the millennia of peace, and the fall of the Republic. Retconning his death removes this meaning and the impact of actual death in the Star Wars universe. If Maul can live, Windu can live, Palpatine can live, then what's the point in telling stories of their defeat? I do love Windu's character, which is why I think he deserves a strong exit. Well said here, and Windu's death really is supposed to be symbolic of a great many things, from Anakin's fall to the dark side to the failure of the Jedi to sense and stop Palpatine because of their own arrogance. You also have Windu going against the Jedi Code and willing to execute Palpatine. Not saying he was wrong about wanting to do that, but if he had followed the code, Anakin would have had no reason to stop Windu, and things turn out a lot differently. And you know, that sounds like it could make for a fun what-if story someday. Now on to this comment from Yofran Farad, who said, Lucas said he lived, so who is anyone to argue with that? Exactly, case closed, long live Mace Windu. Now, correct me if I'm wrong here, and I know some of you will happily do just that if I am, but I'm not sure Lucas has ever said publicly that Windu survived. I know Samuel L. Jackson has said that Lucas has told him that, yeah, he could or did survive, but I don't know that Lucas has actually come out and said that himself. Now, I could be dead wrong, and if you got a link to an article or a video of him saying that, by all means, please do link it in the comments below. Moving on now to this comment from Mandalorian Protector, who said, I really don't care if he lives or dies, but if he survives, then there is a chance that Boba Fett can get his revenge after all these years. And not gonna lie here, that's a hell of an idea for a story. And usually when people talk about Mace Windu surviving, they talk about him facing off against Vader, who of course cut off his hand. But why not make this a bit of a, shall we say, love triangle, and have Boba Fett hunting down Mace, while Mace is hunting down Vader, who somehow knows he's Anakin. I don't know about you, but sounds like that'd make a hell of a story. Next up then we have this comment from R. Thomas, who said, come on, he's Mace mother effing Windu, he can survive anything. And yet again, this is just sound logic that is very difficult to argue against. Then there's this comment from Zach Condell, who said, there's no way a little fall is going to take out that dude if Leia can survive space. And finally here, we have this comment from Champion M, who said, the real problem that would present itself is, what did he do while the Empire reigned? He wasn't invested or aware of Anakin's children, so doing nothing might drag his character down. The quota of Jedi who helped the rebellion but conveniently disappeared before Luke came around is kind of at overcapacity. He's also too powerful to not have been a huge threat to Darth Vader and the Emperor, as he could reasonably defeat either. There are stories that could work, but it might be difficult to make sense for his character and the overall story. And that's really the tricky part about bringing Windu back, because, yeah, as I said before, I appreciate the fact that Samuel L. Jackson loves the character and wants to come back. But you need a good story first. I argued in a video a couple weeks back now that one of the big problems with the new canon is that instead of just creating new good stories, they take old characters and look for stories to tell about them, and usually they have to cram them into time periods where we know either the character or the overall story really doesn't have much room to grow or change. The example I used was the mainline Star Wars comics from Marvel right now, which have been between episodes 4 and 5 for roughly 70 issues now, and that's a time period where not a lot can happen to these characters or overall story. Simply put, there's not a lot of room to play there, and yet that's what they continue to try and do just to sell comic books, and not because there's a great story waiting to be told. And yes, part of me would love to see Windu come back just so that we could see him duel Darth Vader, or maybe to be hunted down by Boba Fett. And I do tend to fall into that category who believes there's a good chance he survived when you consider how others have survived far worse than him. The problem with this, however, is we more or less know how this story has to end. Whatever they do with Windu, he basically has to lose and die again if he comes back. And is that really what they want to do with the character? And if anything here, just give us a great story about him set during the prequels or even before them. But again, this still has the problem of taking a character and looking for a story, And to me, that's been one of the biggest problems with Disney-era Star Wars. They haven't been able to make many truly great new characters through fantastic storytelling, and they just tend to rely on the old characters to help them sell the new stuff. And speaking of the new canon, because many of you asked me about it, I am going to try and cover it a bit more than I have as of late. Just be forewarned, I'll be fair and honest about it. I love Star Wars and all, but as you've probably figured out about me, I'm not going to praise something just because it's Star Wars or has that logo slapped on it. If it's great, I'll say it's great, and if it's not, I'll say that too. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think. Did Mace Windu survive his ordeal? And if so, should we get a story about him? Or maybe should we go back in time and get one during the prequels or even before? Or is he dead and should we just forget all about this character and move on already? Let me know what you think in the comments below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.